and welcome to Widow Talk, real conversations about the things people just don't talk about. My name is Lauren and I'm one of the founders of First Light Widowed Association, and I've been widowed almost 9 years now. And today I have the honour of interviewing one of my fellow founders and the president of our association, Rebecca Adams. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you, Lauren. It's lovely to chat to you.
Exactly. Thank you for indulging in a glass of wine and some widow talk with me today. So here's cheers.
Cheers.
Okay. That's it. Okay, so we're going to be focusing specifically on your experience of dating and eventually remarrying and having your two beautiful little boys. But before we get there, could you please tell us briefly how it was that you came to be widowed?
Sure. I lost my beautiful husband, Daniel, in July 2013. We met nearly 2 years earlier and we'd only been married 6 weeks, and he passed away very unexpectedly from depression. So he'd not long been diagnosed and started medication, and unfortunately had a bad reaction to that medication and lost his life. So it was a huge shock as a newlywed. And just something I never imagined that I would be dealing with so close to getting married, or really at any time in my life. So yeah, I found myself widowed quite young. I just turned 33 and found that there was not really much support or information on the internet for young widows. So yeah, that's sort of where my story in the widowhood started.
Yeah. Okay, so you met in what year did you meet Dan?
Met in 2011.
Okay, and you were married June 2013?
Yeah, married, June 2013, just under 2 years, and then he passed away 6 weeks after that.
Right. So did you find the brevity of your marriage, was that ever, did that ever impact your ability to get support or understanding from other people, like what with your loss?
I found that people who weren't widowed were always quite shocked about it. As a newlywed, I was going through the process of changing my name when he passed away. So I had my new license and my new passport, and I was still going through the process of visiting banks and health insurance and all of those many places with my new documents. I remember having a moment where I thought, well, am I still entitled to taking his surname? Because technically I was his wife for 6 weeks. And I didn't really want to go back to my maiden name because I wanted to hold on to that piece of him that I had. So there was a lot of really strange conversations when I told people that, unfortunately my husband had passed away. And then when they asked how long we were married for, when you say 6 weeks, it's quite shocking, and I found myself quite often almost comforting people who I had to share that news with. But as far as support goes, when I did connect with other widowed people, I found there were a lot of mixed reactions. I think being widowed quite young, there can be a lot of misconceptions about how easy it is to move through your grief. Mm-hmm. People assume that, well, you've got your whole life ahead of you and you can marry again and you still have time to have kids, and you were only together for 6 weeks. But really, how well established were you in that marriage? And I've met young widows who hadn't had the chance to have their weddings yet. And I know something that's common in that experience is that you feel really ripped off. I met people who were widowed for much longer, 20, 30 years, were married 20 or 30 years before they were widowed. And I had people say to me, well, it's much more difficult for me because I didn't really know any other life and we were together for so long that I can't imagine my life any other way. Whereas you were single really not too long ago in the scheme of things, so it should be easy enough for you to go back to that life, which is obviously not the case at all. I felt really like that kind of devalued my experience. And that was a bit of a hurdle to overcome. But I think that's one of the values of First Light, is that we are an organisation for everyone. And if you've lost your person, whether you didn't have the chance to get married or you were married just briefly, it's the loss and the pain that comes with that grief is just as intense. And I remember somebody saying to me, you can't really compare your situation to other people. It's,
Mm.
for want of a better word, we all have a bucket of shit. It's just a different bucket of shit, pardon my French.
Yep,
And
I'll drink to that.
I think that's the case. That's something I just kept in the front of my mind whenever people might say things that were a bit insensitive to me. I thought, well, you know, they're hurting. They don't really understand that I'm hurting just as much. So it's definitely a hurdle you can face when you're widowed young and widowed so soon after being married.
Exactly. Okay, so let's go there to the dating side of things. When did you know that it was time to start dating, and how did you go about getting back out there?
Well, it took me a couple of years. I think for a very long time, the idea of dating anyone else or eventually marrying anyone else just turned my stomach. I couldn't imagine ever being with anybody else. I didn't want anyone except Dan, and I didn't want any life except the life I was supposed to have with him. So I didn't really think about it for a while. I had access to grief counselling, and that really helped me understand that it wasn't a void that I could fill until I'd really come to a place of healing where I felt that I was ready to let someone in. I know it could be quite tempting just to jump back into the dating scene because widowhood is so lonely. For me personally, I knew that I had a lot of healing to do. So it took me a couple of years, a lot of therapy that really helped me find some sort of sense of peace with Dan's loss, which was quite difficult to do, particularly because of the way he passed away being so traumatic. There was a lot of more complicating factors. And I actually met Dan online on an online dating website. So that, to me, when I did feel like I was ready to dip my toe back in the dating pool, felt like the first place to start. And I remember the first time I created a profile on a dating website, I think it was eHarmony, I filled it all in thinking, what am I doing? I'm not really sure I'm ready for this. Saw the publish page, freaked out and deleted the whole thing entirely for, you know, and maybe thought about it 3 or 6 months later. So it was scary, but I guess I felt compelled to try because I did really want to have a family and I knew I didn't want to be alone forever. And it was that balance between feeling ready and knowing that I could really give it a fair crack. I didn't want to become involved with someone if I wasn't willing to really go through with it and be fair to them. And that's just not something you can find yourself in overnight. For me, it took a couple of years before I was ready to go on my first dates, and they were pretty terrible.
All right, well, let's go there. You brought up that triggering topic. So what are first dates like when you're a widow? Does being widowed make it any worse, or does it make it better?
I think it makes it worse. I think you've got a little bit more baggage than people expect. Even, you know, dating in your 30s, you're not exactly a spring chicken, but certainly when you mention that you're widowed, there's a shock factor there, and it can be very. I've got widowed friends who were on their very first date. That was also their very last date, and they've gone on to be with that person. And you know, that's great. For me, it took probably a year of dating, on and off, having breaks and giving myself a little bit of a rest from the dating scene. The first few dates for me were very difficult because I just didn't know how to date as a widow. I think I had my online profile set up, and I actually had my status as widow, and that's a controversial topic. Do you let people know you're widowed straight out of the gate, or do you keep that one?
That was one of my questions. Yes, yeah.
I think my rationale at the time was I didn't want to go on a date with anybody who wasn't going to be comfortable knowing that I'd lost my husband.
Yeah, I felt the same.
Yeah, so I thought, let's just be totally upfront. Let's just put it all out there. Anyone who's not okay with that, let's not waste our time. Let's not make it uncomfortable. I went on a couple of dates with people who didn't bother reading. I think they must look at the pictures and go, yeah, I'll give it a crack. So I actually went on dates with people assuming they knew that I was widowed, and they had no clue. And that led to some interesting conversations. After doing that for a little while, even the people who were really genuine and were kind of comfortable with the fact that I was widowed. I just found that it became almost a defining point of my identity with these men. And we always spoke about it, and I was quite open, but I was careful not to go into too much information and overwhelm people, or to talk about Dan too intensely and maybe put people off. So I kind of came to the realization that I was labeling myself as widowed and putting myself into a box. And sometimes it gave people, they missed out on the opportunity of seeing the rest of me. So I came to the decision where I would take that down, and I would meet people and I would talk to them, and then pretty soon into the conversation or the first date, I would bring it up in a really kind of subtle way. So my husband, Nick, for example, he didn't know I was widowed when we went on our first date. We'd been chatting for a little while, a few weeks, I think. And he was keen to meet, and he actually tried to add me on Facebook before our date, and I was like, oh, you don't want to be seeing that.
Keen.
Yeah. I just prefer to add people on Facebook when I know them, because of course there's pictures of them and there's stories all about my grief. So I remember on our first date, it was going really well. We were having a great time. He was lovely, and I felt like he got the chance to have a first impression of me and who I was and have a bit of a chat.
Yeah.
He ended up asking me, so how come you're single? You know, you seem great. What's the deal? And I said, well, I've been married before. And he's like, oh, okay. And I could tell he thought I was divorced. And I said, unfortunately, my husband passed away a few years ago. And I didn't go into the details surrounding his death. I didn't talk about Dan's suicide. I didn't really want to go that deep. But I let him know that I was widowed. It had been, I think, nearly 3 years by that point. And to Nick's credit, he kind of just handled it really well. He said, oh gosh, I'm sorry to hear that. That's really sad. And then he said, yeah, you're doing okay. And how are you? And how, what's it been like? And we spoke about it for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And then I kind of steered the conversation forward into a relevant segue. I didn't want to get stuck on it. I wanted to see if I really liked this guy and if it was going to actually go somewhere. And then I think over our second, or probably our third, fourth dates, we spoke about it a little bit more in depth. As I started to realise I really like this guy and there could be something here, I felt that he needed to see a little bit more of that side of me and understand a little bit about my experience. So, but I definitely, I had dates prior to that where I mentioned I was widowed, and literally I think they were like, okay, nice to see you, and left. And
check.
Definitely. And that can be quite confronting, and it can be upsetting, but I just took it as a sign of, well, you've saved me a lot of heartache, because if it's not something that you are comfortable with or can find peace with, let's not waste our time. So
exactly.
Yeah.
So you mentioned it took about a year of dating before you met your now husband, Nick. What was that like for you, falling in love with someone other than Dan?
It was really tough. Even though I knew that I wanted someone in my life and I was ready to take those steps forward, the fear that comes with opening your heart up again and giving a piece of yourself to someone, and that vulnerability around putting yourself in a place where you can be exposed to that pain was very difficult. I mentioned that I had grief counselling, and I think I actually picked up with my counsellor again when I started dating. I went back and said, all right, something new's popped up. Can you help me work my way through this one? And she was brilliant. She helped me compartmentalise and work out how I was going to navigate through this. I was really lucky that Nick, my now husband, was very pragmatic, and I think dating a widowed person can be really challenging. It takes a special kind of man or woman to date a widowed person. You have to be incredibly gentle with them. I dated some people who maybe weren't so gentle with me, and you need to have a lot of perspective and a lot of self-confidence in that. It can be easy to be threatened by an eternal love for another man. And Nick just never felt that way. And I remember asking him, does it make you feel uncomfortable when I speak about him? And I didn't want to upset Nick. And he said, why? He's he can't come back and take you away from me, as blunt
That's
as
right.
it sounds. He didn't see it any different than if I'd lost a brother and had grieved a brother. And I would always love a brother in that way. So he was never threatened by the fact that I was widowed, which I think is really important. If I was to date someone who felt jealous or uncomfortable to see a photo or to hear me make a reference to my late husband, I don't think I could have been as open with him as I needed to be. So that's one of the things that has worked really well for us.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. When, you know, the relationship started to progress and get a little serious and coming over to your place and things like that, did you feel the need to de-danify your realm, like to hide photos or things like just in a practical sense? How did you navigate that?
Yeah, I definitely did. I was still living in the home that I had lived in with Dan. I was in the process of moving. Nick was coming into the world that I shared with Dan, and there was, I think I still had some of his clothes in the cupboard, and I definitely had a lot of pictures on the wall. When Dan passed away, I put more pictures out, of course, and I had pictures on the fridge and wedding photos. And when the first time I had Nick over for dinner, I remember walking through the house going, oh gosh, he's everywhere. Dan is everywhere here. And I took a lot of pictures down. I may have left 2 or 3 pictures up around the house. And I think that was because I didn't want him to be confronted with the fact that he was entering mine and Dan's home. But I also, for me personally, I didn't want to be trying to engage in conversation with Nick and develop that relationship while constantly looking over his shoulder and going, oh God, there's Dan on the wall, or there's my wedding photo over there. I didn't want to be distracted and have Dan in the front of my mind so much. So I think that I hid some photos, and I took away a few special mementos, put them in the cupboard for both of us, so that I could try and create some space for me as well to have feelings for someone else. And it's funny, when he walked into the house, Nick sort of walked in and went, have you hidden some photos? Because I was really expecting to see a little bit more. And I sort of went, maybe, like, I didn't really know what to say. And he's like, oh, yeah, you don't have to do that. You can put them out. That's fine. Like, I want you to feel comfortable. So yeah, he's a very, really special person in that he didn't want me to have to hide any part of my past or my love for Dan. But I think, as I said, for me, it was important to not be constantly looking at pictures of Dan while I was trying to create space in my life for someone else.
Yeah. Does Nick have a brother by any chance?
Unfortunately, no. I'm sorry. But
how it usually goes for me.
Yeah. But no, I'll definitely keep a lookout if I can find a friend or anything.
Just curious, how did Nick's parents respond to your widowed status?
Well, I wasn't there when he first told them, but he filled me in that he mentioned that he'd met a girl, and they were asking a lot of questions. They were very curious and interested and excited because he'd been single for quite a while. Apparently they said, tell us all about her, and he said, oh, she does this for a job and she lives here, and all the other details. And then I think someone said, oh, has she been married before? And he said yes, and they all went, oh, she's divorced. And he went, and then I think someone said jokingly, is she a widow? As a really weird.
Yeah.
And he went, well,
actually.
Yeah, she is. And there was a lot of shock. Oh my goodness, that's so sad. And she's so young, and that sort of shock that inevitably comes with finding out that someone's been widowed so long. But it's never really been a concern for them either. They're very understanding and very welcoming of Dan in my life. And when I started First Light, and we run fundraising events, and Nick's family come and volunteer for the organisation and help out, and they really believe in the work that I'm doing now for the widowed community. So they're great. It's not really anything that they've ever felt a concern about, as far as I know.
Yeah. So on the topic of in-laws, I know that you've enjoyed a very close relationship with Dan's parents. Has that relationship changed since Nick entered your life?
It has changed, yeah. I think when Dan first died, his family lived in Sydney, his family and a lot of his friends. And I spent a lot of time, particularly in that first couple of years, travelling to Sydney to spend time around special dates and just regular visits with Dan's family. I think for me, missing him so intensely, there was a lot of comfort in being around the rest of his people who were missing him just as much. My family and friends were very supportive whenever I was really struggling with my grief, but nobody quite missed Dan as much as his mum and dad and his sister, of course. So spending time with them was really comforting, and I did that quite a lot. I went down there to spend special moments with them. I think when I met Nick, and they were very supportive of me dating, and they really wanted me to find a new partner and to have a family, and they were really great in that sense. But I found that I started having to spend a little bit less time in Sydney because I started getting so busy with this new relationship, and special holidays were being spent with him and our families up here. But I think it was one of those things that sort of just shifted a little bit, and probably the way that I had to make space for a new person in my life. I think it came along hand in hand. So I still really care about them. We stay in contact regularly and check in. I don't visit as much. I think especially since having my own children as well, life has just gotten crazy. And when Dan died, there was this huge chasm, like this void in my life that couldn't be filled. And spending time with his family was a really big part of that. And then as I started to rebuild a new life for myself, my life got fuller, and that hole in relation got smaller. And I think we've drifted apart a little bit, which I do grieve as well. And for me, it comes down to when I lost Dan, I lost him, and I lost my future, and I lost the life we were supposed to have together, all the adventures we were going to have together. And I lost that special relationship that you have with his family as my in-laws. So his family were going to be, my parents-in-law, and we were going to have all these special moments together. And when I lost Dan, I lost a little bit of that as well. And I've definitely grieved that, and I still do. I still really miss them, and I think about them a lot. And I think when I went on to have my own children, there was a lot of almost guilt in a weird way, because I was supposed to be having their grandchildren and giving them that gift of grandchildren, and knowing that I wasn't able to do that anymore, I was having somebody else's children, really brought a lot of pain for me as well. So they've never sort of pushed me away or made me feel guilty or uncomfortable or anything like that. As I said, we're still in close contact, but I'm sure that it was challenging for them seeing me build a new life with someone. They would never say as much, because they're just such beautiful people. But I think there's that little bit of the mutual respect of the fact that there was a new path for me coming forward, and it just inevitably changed the dynamics of our relationship slightly.
Sorry, it's made me a little bit emotional, that response. I haven't heard you speak on the topic of how you miss them.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I'm sure they miss me too, and it's one of those things that it's really sad. And the loss is so big. People don't understand that. You lose a person, but you lose a whole life that you were supposed to have, and there's many relationships. Same with his friends. He had amazing friends, and people that I was sort of becoming really close to, and I still keep in touch with, and they're still wonderful people. But you're not going to the weddings and the birthdays and the kids' celebrations, because there's another path for me now. So we're all connected on Facebook, and I love seeing their lives unfold. And they all reach out to me quite often to say how nice it is to see me having my own family and my own adventures. But yeah, it's sad. It's just one of those things that's very hard to. I don't know how it could have been any other way though. Once I met Nick, I think I just didn't have the capacity to keep maintain those relationships, because I was making new ones in that space.
Exactly.
Yeah, they changed a bit. Maintain's probably not the right word. I always would like to have a relationship with them, but it just had to change too.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk weddings. What is it like to to plan a wedding a second time around. Yeah, tell us about that.
That was something I think when you plan your first wedding, you don't ever think, next time I'll do it like this. Like, it's obviously not something that's part of your thought process. So when I married Dan, I absolutely loved our wedding. Everything that we chose together were our most favourite things. So the colours in the wedding ceremony and the colours of the bridal party and the style of reception that we had, and the church was a special church. When I planned my first wedding, I absolutely loved it. So coming to the time of planning another wedding, it's hard because I wanted to replicate things almost, because I loved the choices that we made the first time round, but it was really important to me that it didn't feel like the same wedding. And it's first wedding, so I wanted it to be sort of special for both of us. So I think just because, I guess, just how our relationship is different and they're different men, we had a different experience. We chose some significantly different things. I got married in a church when I married Dan. This time round, we actually hired a yacht and we got married on the Brisbane River with some friends. And it was a very relaxed ceremony it was very sort of casual. Everybody had a drink in their hand. We were cruising around on the water. So we went for a significantly different vibe. So that I didn't constantly be thinking about that first wedding. It entered my mind a lot on that day. There was a few.
Did?
Oh, for sure. I don't think I don't think I could have avoided it. I tried not to spend too much time in that place. I quite often now still, the grief pops up and thoughts of Dan and thoughts of the life we should be having will always be there. Even as my children grow old, I have moments of thinking, gosh, Dan would have been a great father, and wow, we would have been, doing these things with our kids. That's always going to be the case. But I kind of try to honour those thoughts and sort of have a moment and then bring my attention back to where I am and who I'm with. So on the wedding day, there's a few tears. My sister was my maid of honour again, and I had a lot of the same friends and special people there. And we mentioned Dan on the day. I know he was part of my dad's speech, and we acknowledged that special time, but I was careful not to sort of make it, make it a strong focus, to respect Nick and his family and their special day as well. So it was balanced, like most parts of a second relationship and a second love. There's balance there.
Okay, so I was going to ask about whether you still, grieve for Dan, but you've already answered that question, and I know that grief changes, but it's always still there in a way. So I guess I would just ask, if there was someone out there, or if you could go back and talk to, Beck in 2013 or 2015, I think, when you were considering to start dating again, what would your advice be? What would you say to that young widowed person that's toying with the idea of maybe there's something else out there for me?
Well, that's a good question. It's a big question.
Yeah.
I think the advice I'd give myself is to give yourself permission to be happy. That's something that I still struggle with. And don't understand that you can't replicate the life that you lost. So Nick was never going to fill the hole that Dan left. They were never going to, and they're very different people. They have their different strengths and weaknesses. And I had to understand that even now in our relationship, there may be things that Nick might do or say, and I have to resist the urge to compare the two, because it's very easy to think, oh gosh, Dan would never have done that, or he would have handled that situation differently. And there are things that Nick does that I think, gosh, that's brilliant. Like, I wonder how Dan would have handled through that, and it's just not healthy for anyone. So that's something I'm really conscious of, not letting myself go there. There's just no good can come from that comparison of people. I have to sort of find my peace with the fact that love that I had, that relationship that I had with Dan ended and changed. I'll always have him in my life and in my heart, but I had to let go of the fact that he was no longer my future, and find space for somebody else to be that. I don't think our relationship and our marriage between Nick and I would have worked if I couldn't find a way to let go of that and to make my peace with that. So I guess it's don't try and fill the void and don't compare. It's just very unhealthy. And then, as I said about the guilt, I do often think about the fact that Dan wanted me to be happy. When he passed away, I know that he wanted me to have a happy life, and I think that he would be really pleased with the relationship I'm in. He'd think that Nick was a wonderful man, and he'd be over the moon that I've had kids. But gosh, it hurts that, it still hurts that I haven't had that with him. And I think I have to give myself permission to feel those feelings. If I tried to totally put a lid on the grief as it came up, as we know, you can't stifle the grief, you can't ignore it, it's there. So I still take time now to honour that grief, and I communicate with Nick if I'm having a bad day. Anniversaries and special days and birthdays are always tough, and we kind of prepare for that. But there are times when it's unexpected and it pops up because I've seen something in a movie or a thought pops into my head, and I'll be a bit teary and a bit sensitive, and I just let him know, like, I'm having a bit of a bad day, I'm really missing Dan today. And Nick's like, yep, gotcha. He kind of just makes a safe space for me. He might maybe distract the children a little bit so that I can kind of have my time to process that, or he'll just be a little bit more understanding if I'm a bit snappy or a bit sensitive. I'm really careful not to force Nick into the position where he has to, I'm going to try and say this the right way. I'm really careful to let Nick support me through my grief, but I also understand that it's not something that he has the experience to really comprehend. So on days when I'm really missing Dan and I need to talk about something, and you just need to really pour over it, and I will maybe call my sister or my mum or my dad or a close friend, or especially a widowed friend, because they all get it. They all miss Dan as well, and they understand, and they were there for the memories. So I have days where I want to talk about something and remember that time and this happened. Nick just can't be that person for me because he didn't know Dan, and he doesn't have that understanding that comes with the loss. So he's really supportive and understanding, but I channel that really heavy grief towards other areas of my life where people who can maybe help me through it a little bit, they're a little bit better equipped to deal with that really heavy grief stuff when it comes up.
Great. My last question. So today, you're Nick's wife and you're Dan's widow. Does the experience of losing Dan, how does that make you as a wife this second time around? Does it make you appreciate your time with Nick that much more? Or do you have that fear inside that you might find yourself in that terrible situation again? God forbid.
Yeah, I think that fear, for me, will never go away. Once you've experienced loss like that, you lose that innocence that you had before, where people die when they're really old. That's not something I'll ever have to really think about or deal with. Once you've lost someone, especially at a young age like that, it's such a reality you can't avoid it. I worry about my family and my friends and my children, and especially with Nick as well. So I am maybe a little bit more morbid, or I have sort of thoughts that they're a little bit differently. Like, I'll sort of say to Nick, make sure you put your sun cream on every day, and when you're driving, be really careful of this. And even if he goes out for a few drinks with his friends, I think, gosh, what if some crazy person accosts him and punches him, or what if he gets hit by a car? Like, those thoughts are always there, and I know that that's something that Nick had to find. He found very confronting to have me constantly having these terrible thoughts. And he understands where they come from. He understands why I think like that. So he's very very tolerant of my overprotectiveness, and he checks in with me all the time when we're not together. He sort of lets me know where he is, because he gets that if he goes sort of half a day or a day without checking in, and if I've tried to call and that call goes unanswered, and I try to call again in another hour or two, and then, you know, his phone's on silent or it's gone flat and I can't get hold of him, after a period of time, I will start to panic and think the worst, because that has happened. That's my reality. And so he had learned that pretty early on in our relationship. I think there was a day where I couldn't get hold of him, and by the end of the day, I was just frantic. And he picked me up from work and I was in tears, and he was like, what's happened? And when I explained to him, I couldn't get hold of you, I thought you'd died. It was such a shock to him. He would never have thought that, because he'd never lost. So, I'm definitely, that fear is very real. And that's something that, you know, is just accepted. But as far as appreciating him, I'd say definitely, like all couples, we have our difficult moments. You know, we're tired. We've got a 5-month-old and a 2-year-old. So, you know, there are nights we don't sleep well. You can get snappy at your partner. Little tiny innocent habits can become like so frustrating, and you just want to scream at them, like, stop doing this little tiny irrelevant thing. And so that pops up. But I think I quickly realised that's so not important, and move through things a lot faster. And I show my appreciation and my love a lot freer than I did maybe before. I tell him that I love him all the time. You know, we never sort of go to bed angry or sad. I'm always trying to live in the moment. And you know, we try not to put things off as much as we might have before. Financial security is obviously important, but at the same time, I don't want to save for a holiday in 10 years' time and think, oh, we'll do that when, you know, the kids are older, or this has happened, because I know so well that those days aren't always guaranteed.
Yeah, time's not promised, and we know that.
Yeah, so I'm very big on making those memories now, and even on days that maybe we're a little bit tired, I'll drag us out of the house to say, no, we're taking the kids to the park, because, you know, we need to build these moments and make these memories now while we have the chance. So I think I live a little bit more in the moment and love it. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Well, look, Beck, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. I think it's good to know that love and loss can live together, and that there's still a good life to be had after losing your spouse. So thank you so much for sharing. And thank you to our viewers. I hope you'll join us for more Widow Talk. Beck will have the opportunity to you're interviewing the lovely Karen?
Soon, yes.
Yeah, wonderful. So please join us for that. And if you or someone you know is widowed, please check out our website, firstlight.org.au. There you will find your way to a community of widowed people and resources that can help you learn how to best support yourself or someone that you care about. So until next time, Beck, thank you. Thank you, to all our fellow widows and widowers out there, we salute you. Cheers.
Cheers.